this one. Okay. That is very crooked still. Sorry, everyone. Just gonna move that back. All right. Sorry we're a little late again today. I'm still ironing things out apparently, but thank you so much for joining us again for Live Wednesdays. This is something that we're going to keep going at approximately 6:30 MDT. Hopefully in the future that will actually be at 6:30 specifically. Anyways, without further ado, today, Amy and I had prepared some notes about choosing a craft show. And speaking of Amy, if you know our channel and you haven't seen us before, my name's Tanner. My wife's name is Amy. Together, we hand make metal and leather items, and they're usually based off of her fine art, her illustrations, and other artwork. Sometimes mine, but mostly her artwork. And then I help her make those into pieces that we then go and take to. Well, we've gone to over 600 shows at this point. So we've been doing this for some time. And through this channel, we're hoping to help you out if you're just starting off your journey, perhaps as a crafter. Maybe you're part-time and you want to go full-time, or maybe you're just looking for some new ideas or some different things to try for your booth. And hopefully we can help all of you with some of that. So today, as I mentioned, we're talking about how to choose a craft show. And I'm going to sort of talk about some of our costly mistakes that we've made throughout the years. We've been doing this around 15 years now, so I've been doing it for quite a while. And as I mentioned, we've been to over 600 shows. And so, yes, we have made some mistakes and some errors along the way. I think, firstly, though, I would like to say this isn't to say that you can't just do shows for fun and that you might not choose to make some of the same decisions we did just because you wanted to take a trip, or you wanted to go and hang out with your friends that are also vendors, or you wanted to just go to the experience of a certain type of show, like maybe a folk festival or some other type of festival, that kind of thing. And you thought, well, I'm just going to do it for fun. It may not be that great, but hopefully I'll pay for my trip or something like that. Of course you can do that. That's part of the fun of having your own business. So we're not trying to say don't do that ever. But what we are wanting to do is just sort of share some of the things that if you're wanting to pursue it as a part-time or full-time artist, these things you may want to take into consideration when you're booking a show. So I think the first big mistake we had that I was going to talk about today was we avoided an outdoor market here in the area for years, just because it happened to fall in September, and we thought, well, you know, Alberta weather is quite unpredictable. If you're not familiar with it, I mean, I've been doing farmers markets in August, early August, and had it snow. So I was not prepared for that. That's a different point coming up, but like really, it can be fairly unpredictable. And I thought, you know, if that's going to happen in August, it's probably going to happen in September. And certainly we recall it snowing in September or being just overall not nice, not hospitable out, that it's raining or whatever the case is. So we avoided doing this great market. And, you know, the market has a wonderful reputation, is quite large. And many of our friends had said, hey, well, how come you're not doing that? Well, you know, it's outdoors and so forth. And we've now kind of went and looked at the weather statistics, just not that that's the best barometer, but it does give you some indication of historically whether it actually has bad weather on that weekend. Well, we remembered a bit wrong. Bad weather usually starts about 2 weeks later. So, you know, that wasn't the best scenario for us. So I think basically the tip is to research every aspect of the show when you're thinking about doing something like this, including what's the weather like, if that's important. If it's an outdoor show, and typically like May long weekend here is a holiday, and people love to go camping and so forth. But May long weekend in Edmonton statistically has bad weather. And I thought I'd go against it one year. It snowed. So I was doing a farmer's market and it definitely snowed. Like it wasn't just a little bit of snow either. It was quite a bit of snow. And so I, learned my lesson with that one. But on the flip side of that, you want to check and see like, maybe it wasn't that weekend. Maybe I could have done it a week later or a week sooner and it wouldn't have been that type of weather. So that is sort of what we're getting at with that. Our next big mistake was choosing a show because, another vendor, a close acquaintance at the time, this was a number of years ago, at the time, decided they wanna split off and just start their own show. And we liked this person and, always enjoyed vending with them and thought, "Yeah, why not?" Sounds great. We already had a show booked, fortunately, in this case, we already had a show booked, and so Amy and I went to that show, and we got someone else to help us run the booth at this person's show. And that was a good decision, because it was, the person had never been a promoter before. And although the show didn't aesthetically look bad and it was in a location where you think, well, that makes sense. Like it was near parking and bus routes, and it was near busy area in the city. They didn't know how to promote it very well, as it was their first time, and very, very few people came to it. So that wasn't a good reason for us to do the show. On top of that, it wasn't what I would consider really cheap to be a vendor there. So that was another thing that should have been kind of a red flag for us. That was like, well, it's a little much. Maybe we'll see you on the second edition because we already have this other show. Would have been a great thing to have said, but we thought, well, why not try it? I would recommend against that. Unless, of course, the person maybe had been a promoter before and this was just a new series of shows that they were starting. That could be a different scenario, but it could also be a very similar scenario. It takes some time to get a brand of any sort, including a show, going. So that is something that I would watch out for. I have a few more here. So another one that we have done a couple times or a few times was to choose a show knowing that the venue was not ideal or was actually quite bad for what it was. We did it because the advertising looked good and we knew vendors that had done it. And one that I'm thinking of in particular was out of town, and it was really long running, and it was like an established type of show. But um, they had reorganized the layout of the show for the year that we chose to do it, and they did mention that, but we didn't understand the context of that until we arrived. And so basically there were like 50,000 people just on the other side of like a bush, like a line of trees. And it was an outdoor show. And we were in this like secluded, nice, but secluded little area that was basically just filled with mosquitoes. And very few people came over there. And it was not good. Although in previous years it had been good because it hadn't been separated like that. And that's another thing that I'll talk about a little bit later. But that and the fact that the only way to get to it was this like little tiny trail that you had to go single file down it. Part of it was sand and so forth, so it wasn't good at all location wise. And despite the fact that there was a good turnout for the show, the layout really really didn't work at all. And although the promoter became aware of that during the show, they made no real effort to significantly try to rectify it with like maybe even just making a couple large handmade signs or something might have helped. Basically, it did not entice people to come down that tiny single file trail to come check out some vendors. Even though the vendors that were there were, there was a lot of people from that area were there and people that you would think that like maybe the residents would be looking for. It was just too much separation, and just the way it was done didn't work out. Um, The other thing that, you can't assume based on that, you can't assume that it's gonna be the same every year, and the other things that could happen that I've seen happen is, like, a remodel on the building, or it's under construction because it is being remodeled, or because, like, there's all a problem with the ceiling leaking or whatever, and they reorganize things, and you're now just suddenly out of the way, or it limits the access because part of the parking lot's taken up or all the parking lot, and the show goes ahead anyways. And that can be a real hindrance to people being able to attend or wanting to attend. And sometimes they'll add like the promoter will add a new feature into the event. And now, just like with that event, it could be indoors too, and suddenly it's in multiple rooms in a way, like a large a large building that has a whole bunch of conference halls, and you think, well, we're just in the next hall over, but that's a really long walk. Like people may have to walk 5 to 10 minutes in between the halls, and they may just not want to. It could be too intimidating. It could be too exhausting, etc. And so sometimes that doesn't pan out the way that the promoter thinks it's going to, or the way that you might think it's going to. Um, our next one was not knowing enough about a show and the venue or location, the floor plan. And that I kind of breached into that a little bit before. We did a few of these larger shows where they would have a main event happening, some sort of installment, some sort of presentation, and then they would have vendors. And that can be really good. And it can also totally backfire. So sometimes what happens, a few of these events would put up like pipe and drape, and they separated the event from the vendors, even though you were in the same like hall. And then no one would realize that there were vendors on the other side of the hall. And so you would be separated in that way. And that can really be like a discouraging scenario, I think, because we did one where that is exactly what happened. And there were, 10,000 people just on the other side of a curtain, but there was no one hardly coming down the vendor aisle. Like, I mean, 20 people an hour or something. And there's a whole double-sided aisle that ran the length of the hall. And there was quite a few vendors, lots of great things to come and see for people that were at the event, but they had no idea it was there because there was just a little tiny sign at the front of that, and no one mentioned it on their way in. So it worked out very well. We had, and again, I mentioned with the one earlier where there's 50,000 people on the other side of the small strip of trees, so that wasn't great either. Another one that we had a problem with was not understanding the demographic, or assuming the demographic hadn't changed. Let's say there was a show that we did out of town again. It was marketed to us as sort of like an alternative type show, motorcycles and skulls and that kind of thing. And we thought, oh, that was kind of interesting looking show, be a nice trip and so forth. And we spoke to other vendors that we trusted, and they said, yeah, it's good. And so we went. But this year, the venue that they normally used was under construction. And so they moved it, and they put it in this old hockey arena that looked like three buildings that had been sort of like patched together. And there was little air conditioners all over the place, which did a very insufficient job of air conditioning, of course. But there was like 20 air conditioners sort of plugged into this up along the ceiling throughout the hall, and then all the doors were propped open. And the hall was situated in the center, the vortex of three senior centers. And so instead of attracting like the motorcycle crowd and that kind of thing that they had marketed to the vendors, they attracted a lot of senior citizens, and they weren't looking for the same type of things. So it was, confusing for the customers, and it wasn't really great for the vendors either, because it was a mismatch of who came and what they brought and so forth. So definitely really make sure if a show is changing locations that you research that new location and see if it's going to work in your opinion for yourself, or if sometimes it can be better, but lots of times it's not, or people get confused and they think, that they'll almost end up going to the wrong spot because they hear the name of the show and go, oh, that one's always at this place, but then it's not. Another big mistake was not being ready for every type of weather. We have been through 2 tornado warnings at least, and a flash flood where we were doing outdoor shows. And during the flash flood, I had brought a lot of packaging that was cardboard boxes. So I wasn't expecting it. It was beautiful weather, and then just suddenly there was a flash flood. And so that was obviously not a good idea. But I had thought, hey, these are really great cardboard boxes, and I didn't have time to go pick up some new totes, or I didn't make time to do it. I wished I had afterwards. Basically, had to quickly throw everything on top of the tables as the water was going, up past our ankles all of a sudden. And so everything was just sort of mounded up, and it was very unexpected, but it would have been a lot better if I had water water resistant totes and that kind of thing to have kept at least the displays and things that I wasn't using or items that weren't on the table in, preventing any damage or stress or concern about them in that way. So that was definitely something I would recommend. And then, of course, um, I think after every tornado warning, I went and added incrementally more weight for the tent. At some point, it's probably more than enough, but at the same time, we didn't want to have a scenario where our tent blew away and damaged something or hurt someone or anything like that. So we wanted to make sure that the tent was extremely secure. And so that's the first thing I do. I put the tent up and then put a whole bunch of weights on the legs and make sure that it's very, very much reinforced before doing anything else, because the windstorms can pick up suddenly just out of nowhere. And especially if you're on like a street, it's a long street, it can come just barreling down there all of a sudden, just like the flash flood. And almost every time that we've seen it, we were in a large tent that was provided by the promoter one time. And this tent held, I forget, I think 8 vendors, maybe 10. And all the vendors narrowly got out of it before the extreme wind warning really became visible and actually happened. And the large tent tumbled down the street. Fortunately, no one was hurt, and no cars were present on the street because of the festival. But that could have been a really, really dangerous scenario, and could have ended very badly. So that promoter hadn't actually had enough weight. They did have some weights, but they didn't have enough weight for the size of the tent. And I think that was a key thing. Another mistake was signing up for shows or a series of shows or like a season of shows. Sometimes they'll say, well, sign up for all summer or sign up for all winter or whatever the case is, and you'll get a discount or you'll get preferred placement or you'll get to keep the same spot every week. And if you don't do that, you won't get a discount, you won't get preferred placement, and you'll be in a different spot every week, which could be confusing if the market is large. I always found that was a mistake retrospectively, because the locking into like 18 dates consecutively, like once every week for 18 weeks, for example, can be there can be an opportunity cost for you there, like where now something else comes along, you're like, oh my gosh, this would be so much fun. And I had no idea it was going to happen because I hadn't looked into the shows enough in that season, or it's a new event, or it's just something that you just simply wouldn't have found out about, but someone told you about it and you went, oh, I would way rather do that than be at this one again for the 15th time in a row. And it could be a better opportunity, or it could be something that you would rather do with your time, and you can't go because they really don't like it when you book into a season and then cancel like 6 or 7 dates. That's not usually something that goes very well for you. So that is something to think about, and that's something I definitely learned, to research the shows, and not just about the shows, but about the season, about the month, and see if there's anything like in kind of within the radius that we're willing and able to travel. Like, okay, well, what if we went out of town that weekend? Or we should see if there's something over here, or maybe something larger, or whatever the case is, and then try to plan around that when we're doing our applications for these shows that are looking for a bigger commitment of time. Because I don't know, I found that if you do that full 18-week run, it's not necessarily, like, on average, it would probably work out, but not every week is going to be good necessarily. A lot of times you'll get people that will come and then they'll come back like a month later, or they'll forget to come back, but they intended to, and so forth. And so it can be good, and it can also be just like really tiring and cost you the opportunity of going to something that you might have rather done. So at this point, we don't typically do that with a large time commitment. Sometimes there's things that are multiple weekends or something, and that's okay if that seems like the opportunity you'd most like to pursue during that time, for whatever your reason is. But I have found that the longer weeks like that are not really preferable. Another mistake is marketing the show almost 100% by ourselves. So sometimes you'll get a promoter that maybe uh, just sort of leaves the actual promotion and marketing of the show to the vendors and said, "Hey, if you want people to come, make sure you invite everybody off your list," and that kind of thing. But we've been in the position before where we didn't have a very big list, and neither did anybody else there, and so that doesn't really generate a lot of people coming, and it's pretty difficult for everyone. Then, like, it's not good for the show, it's not good for the other vendors, and it's not good for you. And so you will kind of want to look into how the promoter is promoting the show and what they're going to do as their part of the deal. Of course, you do want to promote it yourself as well, but you don't want to be the only person um, that's promoting it, and you don't want to be left with all the promotion along with the other vendors, because many people, they just won't, or they don't have anyone, they haven't built up yet, and they don't have anyone to invite, and they're going to need to rely on the show and then bigger, more established, let's say, artists or vendors to bring people in. So that is something that um, I would definitely kind of warn against that. Also, I would say look at where the location is and what it's used for. For example, is my last example for now is an arena. There's a huge difference between a well-kept or even a not so well-kept hockey arena and an agricultural arena. I mean, you are going to get very different results depending on those two locations, and you're also going to get um, a lot of problems if you're going to an agricultural event. Let's say if you sell like scented candles or something like that, and you go and do an agricultural arena, there's a lot of dirt, shall we say? There's straw, there's bad smells, there's all kinds of things that just aren't part of the experience when you're at a hockey arena. And we've definitely known people where they've had their products damaged by that, and even just like having an arena that's an agriculture arena attached to like a music festival, for example, and then they leave the big door open so that people can see that there's vendors in there, and then that's just blowing the dirt and ingraining it into all the products, and so now you either have to clean them or maybe write them off, etc. And none of those are good scenarios. Like, you don't want to do that. So that I just wouldn't do an agricultural arena unless, of course, you were doing something that was impervious to that in some way, or I'm not sure. Maybe something, if you had a product that you were making that was for livestock, maybe that would make sense. I don't know, but I would generally recommend not doing that. Any of those types of things where, if it's a dirt lot, if it's an agricultural arena, like a beach, it sounds nice, but it's not, because of the sand and the wind and everything. It's not good. And so you don't want that. Like, if you're a jewelry maker, you do not want to get it covered with sand. That can scratch it and get ingrain into all the details and so forth. It's just not any good for you. And a lot of times, if it's windy, it wouldn't be good for the customers either. And you'll find that there's not a lot of people willing to brave those elements. So now I'm going to move on to some general tips that have worked pretty well for us. So it's just general tips in terms of selecting or choosing a craft show. So I think I would start with defining your goals. Um, it depends on where you're at, of course. Like, maybe you are just getting started, you haven't done any shows yet, or maybe you've done a few shows and you want to work up to part time, or maybe you're part time and you want to work up to full time. You just need to decide, what is it that I want to try for next, and it doesn't have to be like this big grand thing that's like really intimidating. It's just the next few steps. Maybe I mean, I definitely recommend like trying to figure out most of your year for this, just because like a lot of the intakes for the shows can be much earlier in the year, so that they have time to promote you and include you in all their materials for the show, and organize things and so forth. So A 1 month plan is good, but I would say a 12-month at least would be probably a better solution for you. And if you can't do it, or you only get to 11 months, that's okay. Whatever you can do, but whatever your goal is, I would try to clearly define that goal. And then, like, are you looking to sell your crafts or increase brand awareness, network with other artisans, or something else? And then I would recommend researching the craft shows, as I mentioned earlier. Um, of course, you want to look for, probably if you're new, you definitely want to look specifically for craft shows that you can easily get to. Like, if you drive, then probably anywhere in your city or the area of your city would be okay. If you need to catch a lift with someone, or if you need to take an Uber, I know people that do that, and that's cool too. But then that would probably limit your proximity that you would want to travel to get to the show. Um, and then beyond that, of course, you want to like research the show very carefully. You want to see what is their online presence like. Um, how much social media do they do? Do they promote the people that are at their show? Do they just promote, like, do they have their own booth at their show and only promote themselves? Do they just generally promote the show, but they don't really give any spotlights to any of the vendors? Or do they only promote the same people over and over? That kind of thing. Check out their websites, check out the comments about the shows and that kind of thing. Consider the reputation and history of the craft show for sure. Shows that have been successful in the past may attract more visitors and potential customers than shows that have had sort of a rough start, or maybe they had to move every single time and it just caused them a problem with people remembering, Was that the show that used to be over there and now it's over here, but next week it's going to be over there," kind of thing. Um, that can be a bit confusing for people, especially when the show picks a more creative name, and sometimes people don't remember that as well. And then definitely look into trying to identify your target audience. So identify the type of audience that attends each of the craft shows and see, like, okay, this is, I don't know, going back to my previous example about the alternative show where they had marketed it as an alternative show. They were saying we get a lot of motorcyclists, we get a lot of people that are looking for like silver, and we get people that are looking for skulls and that kind of thing. So you would anticipate that if you make those types of things, or things that appeal to those types of crowds, that would be a good fit. If you make the exact opposite, it's not to say that wouldn't be good, but you have to take that into consideration when you're planning it out and go, well, strategically speaking, I feel like I do a lot of nature and that kind of thing, and it's a motorcycle show, but it's located in this like mountain pass area, and so the people that are going through there are going through there to experience nature, and they want to just be closer to nature, so they take their motorcycle. Therefore, I feel like my elk and my grizzly bears and that kind of thing that are on my items or my paintings would be popular with the crowd anyways. That's totally reasonable, and that's just something you just want to think about in advance, from my and Amy's personal experience, because we've definitely done it the other way around. We're just like, hey, this sounds like really interesting, we'll sign up for it, and then it's just not the right match. And so that's something that we've learned over the years, to take that very, very seriously and be more give it more consideration. Um, so I think a good example would be, we know another vendor who they do the gun shows in the area, and that's not something we've ever done. But they were telling us about it, and they were saying, well, we make jewelry, and we sell it at the gun shows. And oh boy, ever that's just our type of thing. Oh, okay, that's interesting. But I couldn't think of, like, well, how does that work? Like, what kind of jewelry do you make? And they said, well, we make antler jewelry. So we take antlers from whichever type of deer, etc., and then carve animals into the antler and make them independents and other types of jewelry. Okay, that makes total sense. That was like a perfect niche match for her. And when they went to these gun shows, people were very excited to see what she'd done with that, and her and her husband. So that's just one example. Another thing would be the booth costs and fees. I mentioned earlier, like, we're the one where we kind of, it was another vendor that put on the show, but in order to get a decent location in the area they wanted, they had to spend more, which put the booth costs up, which didn't really line up with the level of experience, sorry, they had as a promoter. And it also didn't line up with, I think they didn't want to charge more than that, but then they didn't have enough money perhaps to properly promote it. And so that was a problem too. Um, and you want to calculate whether the potential sales and exposure from that type of show or from any type of show justify the costs, and make sure it includes additional costs like booth setup, display materials, travel expenses. Um, if you're going to need to buy food while you're there, or you need to get a hotel, or whatever the case is, or you just need to, it's a bigger show than you've normally done, and you need to invest into raw materials for your um, to fill the booth. If you got to get a bigger booth, perhaps, or it's a number of days longer than, say, you normally only do 1 day shows, and now this is a 4 day show, so you're going to need to make more items, and you definitely want to factor in like, oh, I'm going to need like way more ribbons or whatever it is that you need than usual. I would also recommend, for whenever you can, for a new show that you haven't tried before, or type of show you haven't tried before, if you could attend one as a visitor in advance of signing up, or in advance of the cancellation date if you've already signed up, and maybe it's a quarterly one or a one that happens every week or something or other, and get a feel for the show and see if it actually feels like it would be something that would work well for what you make and for yourself too. Like, do you enjoy being there? Do you want to be there? Shows that just aren't going to be your cup of tea, and that's okay. But it is a good idea to visit the show or attend the show as a visitor and just get a feel for it in advance if you can. Uh, then there's also the booth setup and space. Check out the layout of the show and the available booth sizes. If you're just getting started, or if you've done just a few shows, you may be used to having just like a 6 foot or 4 foot space, a little room behind you perhaps as well. Some of the shows, they're going to expect you to fill a 10 by 10. And that can be challenging, especially because you're going to need to make way more product. You're going to need to have more displays. Have might have to get different tables, whatever the case is, and so that can be an issue. But sometimes the bigger shows do have a smaller booth available, and sometimes they have smaller booths available specifically for new vendors. And those are often at a discount too. So you go, hey, you know what? I've only done 2 shows. I haven't done any shows. I've been only doing this for a month or whatever. Would you consider this? And say if your application is successful, you may be able to land a booth that is much less expensive and smaller than the regular booths at that show, and gain some good exposure, and hopefully some, make sales and everything as well, of course. But it may get your foot in at the show without having to have the overhead immediately of needing to buy a bunch of grid wall or new tables and displays and all that kind of stuff. You might be able to just use what you do have. Promotion and marketing. Inquire about the craft show's promotional efforts. As I mentioned before, events with strong marketing campaigns are likely to attract a larger audience, of course. But sometimes, we just assume that they're going to do that. And, that's not the case. Or they do things old school, like they have billboards and newspaper ads or whatever the case is. And those aren't as effective. Like, that's, at this point, those aren't the best ways to market something in terms of an event. And, there's still some shows that do that, and that's okay, but it may not work out as well as you think it's going to, as no one may see it, or it might just be in areas where the potential customers are less, let's say. The application process. Review the application and see if you're ready to actually complete it. So that seems like kind of a weird thing to say maybe, but some applications want you to have a whole bunch of photos. Most do now. They want to have shareable photos for their marketing campaigns, and to show their customers and that kind of thing, and to clearly see your product. And they also have sorry, I left my water upstairs here. They also have we've come across shows where they want examples of your product dropped off. So they'll say, hey, just pop by our office or mail it to our office if it's out of town, that kind of thing. We want to actually see it and hold it and feel it and get an idea about, make sure you really made it, that kind of thing. And so that can be like kind of a pain. Minimally, I would say. I don't like those ones so much. And it's just simply because I think that there's other ways that you can certainly verify and prove that you made your work, rather than having to pay to ship it to a show and then have them say, well, we just let everyone that applied first in, and so it's already closed, or now you have to come and pick it up, or whatever the case is. I just found that it was not a great scenario, so you want to look out for that. You might get all the way through the application and be like, oh, wait a minute, I have to do that, or I have to write a CV, or I have to do something that you hadn't thought about at that time. So you definitely don't want to leave it to the last minute, because like the last step might be, hey, provide your artist bio, and you haven't written one yet. So that can be a little bit of a shock, and you don't want to leave it to the last minute on the last day kind of thing. Location and accessibility. Evaluate the location of the craft show in terms of its accessibility to both the exhibitors and the vendors. So, I mean, it is a centrally located venue with ample parking and public transportation options can attract more visitors for sure. But sometimes, sorry, it's very dry in here. Sometimes this can be a scenario where we did a show, and it was a great show, like a really, really well done show. The promoter was excellent. The location was great. They decorated it beautifully. It just, everything was wonderful. But there happened to be a freak snowstorm. And not the only, but the main way to get to the venue was actually to use the city's train. And just because of the city, that's how they had planned things out. Well, the freak snowstorm happened to put out the train. And so no one could come on the day that was expected to be the most busiest day, except for the people that got basically stuck downtown by the location. So it was kind of slow in that way. Although everything worked out well, it could have been so much better if there had been an alternative for people to park or take a bus or whatever the case was, but none of that was really thought of, because they just always used the train. And so they had incentives for using the train and so forth, and it didn't work out at all. So that was something where, with the limit, it was kind of in a way then limited access, and we didn't really think about that at the time until afterwards, and went, oh yeah, you know what, that probably should have been something that there was a contingency plan for, but there wasn't. The next thing was legal and contractual obligations. So carefully review the show's terms and conditions and any contracts before committing, and ensure you understand the rules and responsibilities as a participant, as a vendor, and what the show is going to provide to you as well. So some of them they're generally pretty straightforward, but sometimes they have like really strict things, and you don't want to overlook that. Like, you can only bring the items that you applied for, and it doesn't matter what you made, how great it is, the fact that no one else in the show has it. If it's not on the contract, you can't bring it. That can happen. A backup plan. So in case the craft show doesn't meet your expectations and could involve having alternative venues in mind, or exploring other marketing opportunities. I think mainly where we were going with that was just like, if you don't want to just put all your eggs in one basket, basically. Like, you don't want to have it so that there's only this show, and then if that doesn't work out, you're not going to have any money, or you're not going to be able to pay for your next craft show if you're just doing it as a hobby or as a part-time gig and that kind of thing. That can be a problem. So you definitely want to keep that in mind when you're preparing for the show, and just going all in can sometimes not be the best way to do things. And so we just wanted to caution people on that, because you don't want to have invested every piece of raw material you have, for example, and then the show doesn't work out. And then the next show, though, you were planning to make something different for, or the next show is not happening for quite a while. And so, it would have been better maybe not to have done that. And then remember that not all craft shows will be a perfect fit. So it's important to weigh the pros and cons of each opportunity based on your goals and your resources that you have on hand. And by following these steps, you can increase your chances of selecting a craft show that aligns with your objectives and helps you showcase your crafts effectively. So I think that, basically not all craft shows are created equal kind of thing. They're going to be There's going to be some where they're just the absolute perfect fit for you, and you love it, and you're friends with everyone there, and the customers are all on a first name basis. And then there's going to be some where you know they're so busy that you can't get to know anyone at all, and there's going to be somewhere you don't feel like just doesn't click with you, and that's okay. So just keep that in mind, that that just means you can try something else next time. So I think, unless I don't see any questions coming up, so I'm just going to leave it there. I kind of went a little bit overtime today. I had longer notes than I expected, but I hope that it was beneficial. I hope that something in there was helpful to everyone that's watching this. And if you did find it helpful and you enjoyed the video and like to see some more of these, please subscribe and like our channel, as that would really help us in terms of being able to create more of this content, and more importantly, hopefully help you by giving you notifications of when we're going live and the other types of videos that we have planned coming up. Amy's got quite a list of videos that she wants to make, and they're all intended to help other vendors along the way. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night.